Hi everyone. We're going to get cracking now. Let's give it a few minutes, as Aaron said, to the stragglers come in. So thank you everyone for attending our first webinar of 2021. My name is Dave and I'm the head of business growth at IndieSpring. Today we have the wonderful Aaron. He is the head of client engagement here at IndieSpring, and he has offered to discuss digital psychology and how we implement this into our design process. As we're moving through this webinar, please feel free to ask questions. Aaron has kindly offered to do a bit of a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so there'll be time to answer some questions. So please ask away in the Q&A section. But with no further delay, I'm going to leave you for the next 45 minutes in Aaron's very capable hands to discuss this topic. Over to you, Aaron.
Thanks, Dave. I think you're slightly overselling my capability here, but we'll give it a go. So welcome, guys. Welcome to the Digital Psychology webinar. I'm Aaron. As Dave said, I head up client engagement here at IndieSpring. So a little bit of info about IndieSpring ourselves. We're a leading developer of mobile applications, and this webinar has been created with the support of our digital psychology team in-house. So during the webinar, we'll explore the framework our team has put together and uses on a day-to-day basis for their clients. The key idea of the framework is to improve behavioral outcomes in our mobile applications, both for in-house projects and for our commercial partners. Though specializing in mobile applications, and though we've approached this with a mobile first mindset, the aim is to give advice and learnings that will apply to most, if not all, digital products. A good place to start then is, what is digital psychology? So digital psychology is the combination of the fields of digital marketing, behavioral economics, and psychology. One of the core aims of professionals in the field is to persuade users of digital products by making changes based on an understanding of the subconscious and the unconscious processes involved in decision making. By examining online behaviors, we're able to give explanations as to why users do certain things and provide actions that you can take to both understand and influence them going forwards. A quick word on the agenda for today. So while exploring digital psychology in this webinar, we're going to run you through 6 steps. These will give you a good understanding and the ability to use digital psychology in your own business, as well as providing a number of examples of real-world applications of these principles. So we're going to start with the unsuitability of the current status quo of user personas, and we'll discuss how best to map out your audience's goals and their likely motivators by using Limbic Maps instead. From here, we'll teach you how to drive your users' actions effectively through an awareness of motivation, ability, and triggers. Once we have an understanding of these areas, we'll start a deep dive into what other motivations your users are likely to have. We'll explore this using Cialdini's 7 principles of persuasion, before then going on to the dual process theory and how intuition and content can be used in tandem to give the best results. We'll also explore the best ways to engage your users in a way which forms habits by using triggers, routines, and rewards. And then finally, we'll take the time to look at the ability area of our motivation, ability, and trigger trifecta with an overview of how and why you should develop with accessibility at the core of everything you do. So first up is why user personas are a thing of the past. This first principle is around changing the way we create and target user personas. You've probably been there. Traditional user personas are created around the board table with marketers and stakeholders, long painstaking meetings discussing every aspect of who they believe their ideal customers are. You've likely had the sneaking suspicion that these processes aren't the best way to get to know your users. I mean, why else would so many businesses spend thousands or tens of thousands of pounds afterwards to validate these sessions through user testing? So let's start by looking at the traditional process of creating user personas and why this probably isn't the best way to do things. When making a traditional user persona, you'll usually start with your user's gender, age, job title, then move on to more personal aspects of their lives, things like the cars they drive, aspects of their family life, like how many pets they own. You can see how, unless you happen to be selling cat food or home products, you're often wasting your time on unnecessary information. This takes time to generate and discuss, and then it can be distracting from your potential users' real motivations. Generating user personas is an exercise that can be useful at the start of projects, and it definitely should still be a part of your marketing toolbox. But frankly, the information generated here can often be no more than a distraction that pigeonholes your users. The obvious reason that pets and interests aren't as useful as we often think is because they don't have any real reflection on the reason that people use your products or buy your services. Our brains make decisions and form opinions within 50 milliseconds of seeing something. So often users have already made their decision before you get a chance to speak to these surface level observations. Even if you do get a chance to speak to these, users often operate under their idealized personas anyway. So their ideal circumstances affect their motivations more than their current circumstances. So if everything we think we know about user personas is wrong, then how do we learn about our users in a more effective way? That's where we break out the Limbic Map. So we use the Limbic Map to discover the deeper motives and values of users. By using a Limbic Map, our thinking is focused on the emotions and motivations. And this model can guide you to make more informed choices in terms of the aesthetics and the language you should be using to encourage your users to behave the way you want them to. As you can see, the Limbic Map shows an array of different motivators and by extension, a range of potential objections as the polar opposites. For example, someone with the tolerance motivator would likely object to intolerance. The assignment of these emotional values to certain fields was undertaken by qualified psychologists, and their distribution and relationship are based on empirical data gathered and assessed by the Nymphenburg Group, which is a university-supported marketing group based in Germany. Using the Limbic Map will allow you to create a single group of emotions and drivers, sometimes a couple if you're unsure, which then allows you to pick a focused persona from the ones we'll outline shortly. These personas have strong emotive drivers, which will easily guide your designers on how to create the look, feel, and user experience of your digital product. If you already have some traditional user personas or existing user data, then you can use these as a basis, but otherwise it's completely fine to start from assumptions at this point. To begin using the Limbic Map, you should start by plotting out the core values, behaviors, and traits of your users in order to show any bias towards a particular side of the map. And once this is mapped out, you'll be able to target against the 3 key emotional groups. As a guide, these are stimulant. So this includes playful emotions, things like creativity, curiosity, fun, pleasure, and humor. Dominance. This involves order and discipline, but also in attaining status or positions of power over others. So words like power, pride, honor, ambition, or logic. And finally, balance, which includes security-related terms like trust, friendship, loyalty, and home. On this map here, we've plotted 2 different clothing brands, both of which you'll recognize, and we'll take a look at how they've approached designing their websites based on the principles discovered here. Patagonia in orange is more complex than simply erring towards one side of the Limbic Map. Their users are likely to value authenticity, safety, and quality, which skews them towards balance at the bottom of the map, while also valuing fun, individualism, and risk at the top. This could provide a challenge as marketers need to effectively appeal to both sides of the coin here. Chanel, however, is massively skewed towards the dominant side of the map, with fame, status, and pride being the key motivators of their clients. So if we take a look at the Patagonia website, we can see how they've implemented the motivations we showed on the Limbic Map. The imagery is more about how and where their products are used. It's clearly speaking to motives such as fun and risk appetite, as the brand is built on adventure and exploration. However, they realize that the quality of their products is also important to their user motivations, so the content they use directly addresses this. Purposely designed being a key phrase in their content that sets their quality out while also making sure their imagery has space to talk to the other motivations. Chanel, on the other hand, are leaning heavily on imagery and bold colors. The grand staircase shows status and pride, while the bold colors and design choices of the clothing range show courage and freedom. This is why they don't feel the need for the overlay of content like Patagonia do. Their group of motivators are close enough to address in a much more succinct manner. The imagery and a strongly minimalist branding is all that they need. So what should you do if you're not sure that you've accurately defined your users' motivations? Or what if you've identified several different locations on the Limbic Map, similarly to Patagonia? This is where you should A/B test or even perform multivariate testing to try your theories. Testing is an incredibly powerful tool when paired with plotting users on the Limbic Map, and the decisions you're making for each test are based on different areas of motivation. So the design decisions for each test should align with each specific motivator. With the test on this screen, it was discovered that the design tailored to individualism converts 70% more often than the other versions. This validates, or maybe it invalidates, the thinking that you made when you were making assumptions on the previous step. However, the other variants were still useful, as multivariate testing allows you the freedom to use other designs for specific advertising campaigns, targeting different user types, meaning that the message still resonates with the motivators of different target audiences. This highlights another powerful use of the Limbic Map, as customer segments can be quickly mapped, and running different versions of pages ensures that you're accessing and resonating with more than one segment of your target market. Looking at the individual images, you can see the design changes to match the motivators of each group, and the language changes align with the emotion of each persona. So for example, with stimulant saying where next, dominance going with outstanding, and balance going with out of the box. Remember, a user is not solely buying your service or your product, they're also buying the experience and feeling they get from doing so. Focusing on motivations and objections allows you to develop your messaging, content, user flow, and triggers to ensure that your product's specifically tailored to the wants and needs of your clients. So how to drive your app with user motivations? By identifying and utilizing user motivations, we can more easily influence users towards desired behaviors. In conjunction with good old-fashioned digital optimization strategies like conversion rate optimization and multivariate testing, we can model and improve the outcomes of user behaviors. Depending on what you choose to priority, this can directly affect your bottom line by positively influencing purchasing decisions, user engagement, and habits. A good way to start is by looking at the Fogg behavior model to better understand how you can help users to act upon their motivations. So the Fogg behavior model was developed by Dr. B.J. Fogg, an American social scientist, research associate, and noted behaviorist author. Digital psychologists utilize the 3 key requirements laid out by Fogg in order to produce a required behavior. These are adequate motivation, adequate ability, and a trigger. If you can introduce or reinforce any of these 3 factors, you can improve the likelihood of inducing the desired action from the user. So first up is motivation. Why do users actually want to use your service? When a user attempts to use your digital service, they do so because they have some motivation that's led them to you. This could be something as simple as boredom, so things like Facebook, hunger, so think Deliveroo, or needing to get from one place to another like Uber. It could be that they require a tool to solve a more specific problem. What's more is that emotional and often highly personal motivators like standing out from the crowd, displaying dominance, or fulfilling a fantasy can be incredibly motivating beyond immediate needs, but often go unrecognized even by the users themselves. Next up is ability. So how easy have you made it for your users to complete the required action? When users are motivated to take an action, the next stage they need to cross is ease of use and their ability to complete the desired action. When it comes to ability, we define actions by how easy or how hard they are to complete, with easy to do actions, so things like single tap sign-ins through social media, being far more likely to be completed compared to hard to do actions, like a long and onerous registration process. In addition, users with a low motivation are far more likely to be put off by a hard to do action as they aren't highly motivated enough to complete them. By preempting the user's desired end result and signposting the required actions to complete it, we're able to overcome the ability hurdle. Being able to preempt what users will attempt to do is often driven by a mixture of analytics, experience, and emotions. And it's also important to take into account any potential accessibility hurdles in terms of physical or mental requirements. And finally, triggers. So what's made your users want to resolve their motivation now? A trigger is what causes the immediate need to solve the motivation. This could be that you've realized your shoes are beginning to look worn, so you need to buy a new pair, or spotting an ad on the train and it compels you to take action now. Both of these provide an immediate need that you'd like to solve or investigate further. As you can see from the chart on this slide, if you can hit the sweet spots of motivation and ability anywhere above the action line, at the moment the trigger comes into play, then your users are likely to take the actions you require of them. Demotivate users or make things difficult to do, and you're likely to fall below the action line, which makes it unlikely that they'll proceed, even when they're triggered to do so. For example, if you see that your shoes need replacing and you also see an ad on the tube, that's great because you've got the trigger and the motivation, but the fact you don't have any signal on the tube means that you don't have the ability to complete the action. And where a trigger has failed, users are likely to either go to your competitors or, in this case, give up entirely. A good example of a mobile app that uses these principles really well is Uber. A user needs to get from one place to another at some point, which provides motivation. They want to get registered quickly and with minimal fuss in order to facilitate this. And in this case, they need a taxi as soon as possible, providing the trigger. Uber uses a process that can get a user from the start of the process to submitting their number for a security confirmation text in as few as 4 taps, thanks in large part to social sign-in that you can see on the middle screen. After confirming the security text, the user is taken immediately to the page that corresponds with the most likely motivator, getting a taxi. One improvement that could potentially be made to the user sign-up journey here would be to remove the requirement to add a telephone number manually or to integrate autofill and reduce the amount of data entry. Currently, a user who goes along with the existing flow needs to enter that telephone number manually, but it's still a low resistance process. Another great example of this is the Disney Plus application. Users who want to use this service may want to watch a specific show, or they might want to sign up and add Disney Plus to their current list of streaming services. And in both these cases, Disney Plus provides quick access to sign up, and the front page provides immediate access to a search bar and the most popular content. You can see here that the sign up process is about as quick and pain-free as possible. Where Disney Plus really shines, though, is by providing triggers once you're using the service. Recognizing that often the motivation to use a streaming service is either boredom or the release of a new piece of content, the Disney Plus app times its push notifications in line with typical times of day when users are less likely to be working or otherwise occupied. They'll also often use a new or popular piece of content as the catalyst to bring you back into the application. And then once there, they direct the user straight into the content to remove any unnecessary barriers. It can take time to get used to applying the Fogg behavior model to real life products, but it's a good place to start. A good place to start is to remember that by finding and using the motivations and abilities of your users, you should be able to find the objections they're going to raise. Once you know what these objections are likely to be, it's possible to add preempted response, either in terms of UX, so making it easier for users to do what you want them to do, or in content by answering objections directly. But how can you more directly get users to do what you want? Well, as far as technology has come, there's something that's often forgotten as designers and developers who utilize these changes. The way humans behave is still the same. By understanding human behavior, we can tailor our solutions to tap into this rather than attempting to break users away from what's hard-coded into them as instinct. This doesn't mean that changes in technology can't be harnessed to improve digital experiences, but we need to be careful what we change. Have you ever heard an iPhone user complaining about how they can't use their friend's Android device or vice versa? This is because they've got learnt behaviors on those operating systems, and changing from one to the other can be frustrating and difficult, so people tend to stick with what they know. The same is true for how we develop apps. It normally isn't a great idea to reinvent the wheel. Keeping certain behavior conventions will mean it's easier for your users to adopt and to use your application efficiently, and this is where lots of designers trip up. The aim as designers and developers is to utilize the tools available to us to create amazing experiences. And oftentimes this is tied to something novel and new, but where this hasn't been linked to some previously learned behaviors, this can become a hindrance rather than a positive. So human behavior boils down to motivations. If we're hungry, we eat. If we're thirsty, we drink. And if we're tired, we sleep. These are basic motivators for our most natural behaviors. And they're also some of the key behaviors that marketers have always been able to target. There's a good reason that Coca-Cola and McDonald's have never left the top 10 most popular brands in the last 60 years. The specific motivators in the Limbic Map act upon us as individuals, and as we've looked at previously, they can help us to map out against stimulant, dominance, and balance in order to build content for our likely users. However, humans are as a whole social creatures, and this has led us to develop other global types of motivators that we often take action on. These are based around social interaction, and they're summed up by Cialdini's 7 principles, which you can see here. I'm just going to take a drink. So Robert Cialdini is a hugely influential author and professor of psychology and marketing at Arizona State University, and his works are built around the foundation of persuasion and how marketers and digital product professionals can use his 7 principles to help persuade their audience to take action. The principles are, and I can never say this first one, reciprocity, commitment, social proof, authority, liking, scarcity, and unity. And we'll run through those in a bit more detail for you now. So the first 4 of these are reciprocity, commitment, social proof, and authority. Reciprocity. So people like to help people and to repay kindness. It's in our nature, and as social animals, it actually releases endorphins and makes us feel good as we're doing it. However, this motivator can be difficult to tap into. If you can tap into it, though, you can often motivate people to take actions even when they might be difficult to accomplish. This can be as simple as giving something to your users for free, then asking for them to do something for you. So in this example on screen, a mobile game is giving away some in-game credits in exchange for a review. When a user hits accept, they're taken to review the app. There are actually a few ways that we could make this task more simple as well, by providing a 1 to 5 rating where a single click submits a review instead of a user filling out a questionnaire or form once clicking through. The better way to do this would also be to give away the credits, and then while this is still fresh in the user's mind, ask for a review later. The second one is commitment. So as people, when we commit to a cause in any format, we're more likely to commit to it again. For example, if someone donates to charity, then they're more likely to donate to the same charity again in the future as they've committed to the cause. The best way to utilize this is to scale users' engagement and commitment over time. Lots of apps give away free trials for certain periods to entice users into using their platform. And giving away something for free incentivizes your new user to engage and take that first step towards commitment. The next step could be to offer a discounted period where the user makes a slightly more significant commitment before paying full price. Amazon Prime is a great example of using commitment. They offer a month's free trial to demonstrate their value, and then once the user commits to a monthly subscription, they're incentivized to use Amazon over other services for every purchase. I know myself that I order things from Amazon just because I've got Prime, even though I could quite easily nip out to the shops. On to number 3, which is social proof. Social proof is probably the most commonly used motivator in apps and other digital products. The more people around you that take a certain action, the more likely you are to do the same thing. Goes without saying. For us as digital marketers, that means using things like testimonials or ratings to increase engagement and to build trust. However, this is also being used in some much more tangible ways that tie into the other principles. So some apps and websites will tell you how many people are viewing a hotel room, for example, or how many people have a certain item in the basket, like the example shown on screen. This triggers our social proofing because it means to us that this is popular and therefore compels us to want it more. And then finally, authority, or finally for this screen, I should say. As we've developed as a society, we've developed a respect for authority. Seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? When professionals in their field, like doctors or lawyers, can often compel us to take actions where other people we might just ignore. Within digital products, there are a few ways we can tap into this. So a great way is to have an authority figure involved in your project. For example, if you offered a subscription to digital copies of children's books where users download a book each week, having recognized children's authors review the books in your offering is a great way to get people to download them, since an expert in the field is advocating them. Another idea, which may be even more powerful, will be to have the authority figure involved in your marketing. For example, how toothbrush and toothpaste brands often have dentists endorse their products. Furthermore, posting expertise from a wide variety of sources that support any claim of your product as part of the marketing will always help tap into the authority motivator and grab users' attention. So moving on to the following 3, liking, scarcity, and unity, and then we'll have a quick rundown of how to use the principles. So first of all, liking. People are always more likely to be persuaded by someone they like than someone they don't. One way to go about getting people to like you is through branding, whether it's personal or company brand. Creating an image people like is important. So this might include things like sharing charity work to be seen as someone who gives back, or interacting with people on social media in an empathetic way. Likability actually outperforms all other predictive metrics when it comes to advertising, which is why it's essential to communicate outwardly in a likable manner. It can be the hardest thing to get right, but once you get it right, you'll be the first person people think of when they want to solve their problem. Next up is scarcity. So scarcity is the idea that without taking action, someone may miss out, or fear of loss, and it's an extremely powerful motivator. You'll almost certainly have seen this in action while shopping online, normally used in tandem with social proofing. So, for example, 20 people have looked at this item in the last 24 hours, or only 2 spots remain. This technique is extremely well used in e-commerce, but we can use it for other types of digital products too, offering limited time discounts or freebies for the first X number of people to take action are good examples of using scarcity to motivate users. A quick word of caution though on scarcity. This can very quickly be overused and lose all credibility. Some people find these e-commerce notifications annoying and overly pushy, and we're becoming desensitized to them as they are on every item in the shop or on every hotel room that we see. To be an effective motivator, they need to be used infrequently so it feels authentic and urgent. And then finally, unity. As diverse as we can be as a species, we all seek unity in some capacity. Being part of something is a powerful motivation, and many influencers use this principle to motivate people to continue to interact with them. We support teams, we have political beliefs, we divide the world into nations, and all of these things have one thing in common: we. Even if you have a difference of opinion with someone, if you both support the team, you can say, well, we support X, or we believe Y, or even we're from Z. This exists to create community, and this unity that it creates is an extremely powerful motivator. This language should be used across your marketing and within your user journeys to create a feeling of unity. To take it a step further, the best way to tap into the feeling of unity is to create an actual community around what you're doing. The Manchester United app is a great example of this. They use user polls and elements where users interact with each other frequently, as well as referring to the team as the Reds or our lads, in order to reinforce the idea of being part of a larger but tight-knit community. The 7 principles of persuasion are powerful tools. As such, they should be thoughtfully considered while creating any type of digital content, and throughout the entire process as well. In the first meetings, when you're fleshing out the idea, you should be considering what will motivate your users first to engage with you, and then throughout their journey with you. Then every single time a user engages with your product, from marketing touch points to daily interactions, ask yourself, how can you continue to support your audience's motivations? Perhaps as we've been running through this section, you've recognized some of your own motivations, or possibly even denied that they're influencing you. The fact is that most of the time we're not thinking about our motivations when making decisions, and this is why they can be so powerful. So we've already talked about the Limbic Map and how it can be more valuable than traditional user personas when designing the user experience for your products, but how exactly does it work? Well, as human beings, we often feel that we're rational and reasonable actors in our own lives who make sensible, well thought out decisions based on logic. And frequently we assume that our users are going to act that way as well. Actually, psychologists tell us that more often than not, this isn't the case. We still rely on instinct-driven decision-making, which we then post-rationalize. Post-purchase rationalization, which is also known as choice-supportive bias, is the tendency to retroactively give positive attributes to an option you've selected and to demote the options you've foregone. So for those in the app space, that goes a long way to explaining why users often become emotionally attached to and defensive of Android or iOS. Let's discuss dual process theory and explain how applying this framework to UX design can help. The limbic system is the part of the brain involved in our behavioral and emotional responses, especially when it comes to behaviors we need for survival, so feeding, reproduction, caring for young, and fight or flight responses. Psychologist and Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman describes this kind of thinking as System 1 thinking in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. System 1 thinking is instantaneous and driven by instinct or prior learning, while being less energy taxing and quicker than engaging the logical frontal lobe, or System 2, as Daniel calls it. Because of this, the always efficiency-seeking human brain allows our System 1 beliefs, biases, and intuition to take the driving seat for many of our choices, even when we believe we're making decisions rationally. It'll often only engage the more energy-costly System 2 for the relatively easy task of post-rationalization. So now that we know how this works at a high level, how can we begin to use this knowledge to make sound design decisions? Here's some tips to keep in mind. First up, don't confuse System 1 thinking with emotional thinking. Often when interpreting this work, it's tempting to fall into the trap of treating System 1 thinking as purely emotional, but that actually distorts its true meaning. For example, take the idea of picking up your usual brand of milk while you're out shopping and you're in a rush. It's most likely it didn't take any real thought or involve a strong emotional bias towards that particular brand. Yet your System 1 thinking autopilots you towards it. It's the same thing that happens with muscle memory actions. So things like riding a bike or driving a route that you've done thousands of times before. Probably all of us have had that experience of driving somewhere and not really knowing how you got there. From a UX design perspective, this opens up a world of opportunities around using familiar design cues and page placement to encourage particular actions based on user expectation. This can facilitate a user reaching your preferred outcomes by following that easy to use and familiar process. Encourage desired behaviors, but avoid dark patterns. So dark patterns are user interfaces which have been carefully crafted to trick users into doing things that they don't necessarily want to do, and they often supplant user value in place of shareholder value. Take a moment to look at the window on screen, which recommends that the user applies an update to Windows 10, and think about how you would cancel the recommended update if it was something you didn't want to do. If you'd have clicked the X button on the top right-hand corner, then you're wrong. Though in every other circumstance you'd ever see an X button in the top right-hand corner in Windows, you'd be correct. In fact, Microsoft completely changed the use from the perceived and commonly understood close the window and cancel the potential action to close the window and automatically download and install the update. In fact, just about everywhere obvious on this screen would have updated Windows, as you can see from the red circles. Only this button, hidden in the least likely place, would have allowed you to cancel the download. This actually led to a number of people downloading the update when they didn't want to, and even a lawsuit. Some users had downloaded the update while hooked up to the internet on their phone or on a metered connection and seen high bills because of it. As much as this dark pattern likely led to a number of users doing what Microsoft wanted them to do, in this case downloading Windows 10, it also led to a number of incredibly angry users and tons of bad press. Encouraging a user to do something they may want to do by utilizing good UX practices and forcing a user to do something they don't want to do by using dark patterns really aren't dissimilar in the skill set that your designers are putting into play. They are, however, both poles apart ethically and in terms of good customer experience. Just don't do it. And design for intuition, back up with content. Intuition can often be the driving force behind the way that we use digital products, and it's not something which can be dismissed lightly as a buzzword or a fad. Intuition is built deeply into everything we do in both the physical and the digital space. It's the automatic recognition of past experience, and it guides our hand during our current actions. Though we'll often follow our intuition to a certain point, and we can facilitate this with good UX design, there frequently comes a point where a user is going to engage their system 2 thinking and begin to try and rationalize their actions. It might be right before clicking the buy, register, or subscribe button, or it could equally be at some earlier point in the process. Whenever it occurs, this is the moment where a user might begin to look more critically and seek to find something which justifies their actions. And this is also the point at which content becomes king. High quality, informative content backs up the statements you've made and the journey you've hopefully taken your users on thus far. Depending on the perceived cost in terms of data, time, cash, or something else, you may need more or less content to remove these obstacles. So for example, as a business who trade almost exclusively in bespoke mobile applications, which cost tens of thousands of pounds, we produce a wealth of high quality, relevant content in order to show users our capabilities before they're willing to commit to even an emailed inquiry or a subscription to a mailing list. Businesses like a social media giant who's well known and generally trusted may only need to reinforce their core offering and offer a quick and easy sign up before users are willing to hand over some personal data. And of course, there's everything in between as well. Working out the correct combination of content, instinct, and ease of use is the key to designing great digital products. So remember, System 1 and System 2 are often used in tandem as well. So it's a small caveat to all of the above that we've just been through. It's often treated as though System 1 and System 2 are completely separate processes, with System 1 blazing a trail, while System 2 swings into action after the fact and cleans up the mess. Unfortunately, this is a simplification, and it's a generalization that UX designers need to avoid falling into. A user will use both systems interchangeably throughout their journey, looking for small hints of where to go next in the UX or teasers of the juicy content hidden just out of sight. In fact, often the impression of content can mean as much as the content itself. At a high level, the way to appease both systems at once is to offer familiarity and ease of use, while also allowing glimpses into the power of your solution and the depth of your credentials. Once you've convinced users to use your product, the most powerful and profitable tool in your arsenal is to assist them in forming a habit. So user engagement is key to driving success with every digital product. If our audience doesn't engage with our platform, it won't matter how useful a tool it is, if they simply won't benefit from it, and it will fall by the wayside. User engagement is so important that entire agencies have been set up to help digital products engage with their target audience, but it really doesn't need to be complicated. The strongest driver you can create in your audience is a habit. Once your users use your product as a habit, they're likely to continue to do so for a really long time. Breaking habits is extremely difficult once established, and even when we consciously try to break habits, it can take months to do it. Most habits exist because our brains are seeking efficiency or because they make us feel good. So for most habits, unless they're particularly bad, there isn't a desire to break them. Social media in particular is driven by habit. We're a social species. We want to see what our friends are doing and interact with them. And that's the goal that drives us to adopt social media platforms in the first place. Then we enjoy the experience of speaking to distant contacts and a window into what's going on in the world of our friends. So we come back and back and back. We form a habit. Then over time, our social media becomes diluted with people we care less about and with ads. But the habit is formed and we still use it. In fact, in 2020, the average user spends over 2 hours a day on social media. So we can see how powerful that habit can be. Now, we've glossed over the forming of the habit a little there with social media, and it's not quite that straightforward. So how do we form habits with our users? Cues or triggers are what set off our habit. Now, there are two types, internal and external. Both are great at helping us form habits, but having your product internally trigger can be the key to success. But we're going to start with external triggers. These are more noticeable. You'll see them every day from digital products trying to get you to build habits. They're obvious and they're semi-intrusive to your day, but they're also extremely effective. Push notifications are a great external trigger, especially in our app world that we deal with. They're designed to instantly engage an audience to access a product or service. However, the real goal of push notifications is to start the process of building habits by triggering a response from the user themselves. Going back to our social media apps, when you start using an app like Facebook, they will send you push notifications all the time for most things that happen on the platform. So new likes, new messages, new friend requests. Over time, these notifications become less frequent. This is because Facebook knows you've formed a habit and are engaging regularly without these triggers being required. And this is because they know that external triggers can become a nuisance and they need to be used carefully. If you have an external trigger firing after a habit has been formed, they begin to have the opposite effect as users become frustrated by notifications about things they've already seen or were planning to do. This demonstrates how critical it is to be aware of how your users are interacting with your applications. So using tools like Firebase or App Center allows you to monitor the level of engagement individuals are taking, and then you can personalize the frequency of notifications they receive depending on their behaviors. Some other types of external triggers that we can use with other digital products are things like emails, ads, or CTAs in partner products, which all encourage our users to return and engage, helping to take that first step to forming a habit. Internal triggers that are even stronger but less noticeable. Internal triggers are based on how things make us feel. Emotions and routines power them, and the actions we take from them are based on decisions we make independently. With internal triggers, the users themselves are making a choice, and it's based on desire or need. These triggers can only be achieved if your digital product is in the response to an innate need or desire. In our social media example, the desire is to be informed, to see what's happened since you were last online, see what your friends are doing. And other types of products in e-commerce also do it based on desire. So shopping releases endorphins, which makes us feel good, and we continue to do it. Need is more difficult to create than desire with digital products. But if you can encourage your users to build a habit through external triggers, you can encourage your users to build the habit through external triggers and through excellent service. For example, if you're hungry and you immediately jump on your Just Eat app. If you can turn your app into something which is internally triggered, like with the Just Eat app there, then your users have formed a habit. Now you can develop great cues and triggers, but neither of these are going to be much use without developing the requisite routine and reward. By using a set routine and cadence of cues, you prime your users to interacting with these triggers. The most common way to set a routine is to send a push notification or a message at a particular time of day. But in apps, this can also be synced to things like the user's location or actions they've taken on their phone. The trick here is to tweak it as you go and monitor engagement levels based on different routines. Reward. Reward is obviously crucial in building habits. Dog owners, for example, will know how tempting a sausage is to help with puppy training or making a dog come back. And humans actually aren't all that dissimilar. In fact, it always reminds me of the old joke about Pavlov sitting in a bar. The bell goes as someone opens the door and he goes, "Oh no, I've not fed the dogs." Just like with dogs, A user's reward is what helps them gain a positive association against the trigger you're putting in place. And as much as we're not advocating offering your users sausages, you should be offering some rewards. After all, it's you that wants them to take action and build a habit, not the user. So incentivize them. We've discussed some motivators based on Cialdini's principles of persuasion. Each of these can be turned into a reward. If a user engages, then maybe they get some exclusive membership or free access to an event as part of your offering to appeal to unity. Maybe they get a badge on their profile to mark them as a significant user. There's loads of different types of rewards you can do. Which brings us on to a few different types. So social rewards. Social media does this really well. They show you which other friends are online and what actions they're taking, which taps into principle 3 of social proofing. You can also see how the motivators can tie in with building habits and giving the sense of reward for taking action on that trigger. Resource rewards. E-commerce and mobile games do this really well with discounts or giving away free in-game currency for using their triggers, but there are all sorts of different resource rewards that we can use digitally. And finally, achievement rewards. Gamification is a great reward system, and building this into your product's core function is an awesome way to engage your users. Users begin to take ownership of things if they can assign a sense of personal success to it, and the sense of achievement and mastery is a powerful feeling that we can tap into. The key here is to repeat the habit forming process constantly. So why is building habits in your users so important? Building habits is important because even though we focus most of our efforts on finding new customers, it's actually easier to keep current customers coming back. And we know that repeat customers spend more, they cost less, and they also act as advocates for your business. This is the same across both product businesses and service-led businesses, and almost all digital products behave in the same way. When it comes to mobile applications especially, if someone isn't engaging with your app on a daily basis, they'll probably uninstall it eventually. And this is why building habits is key to boosting revenue from the group most likely to buy from you, your current customers. So as a very quick summary of what we've just been through, first, you should use cues and triggers to encourage your users to take action. This trigger needs to happen routinely, whether it's daily, weekly, or monthly, and there needs to be consistency and giving users continuous opportunities to engage. Reward your users for engaging with your triggers. So if it's discounts or gamification or with an outstanding offering, just give a positive association for the users that act upon the triggers you're providing. And then repeat the process over and over to help form a habit for your users and turn them into repeat customers. One thing though that could stop people from ever becoming a customer, let alone a repeat one, is if they can't use your product at all. How would you feel if you enter the shop to find that the products, the tills, or even the staff are walled off to you by invisible barriers? Frustratingly, most people seem to be able to walk through these barriers and conduct business without issue, but you're stuck and unable to do what you want to. Chances are that you'd decide to leave and you'd not go back to that shop again. And this is the experience of many users with disabilities who enter a website or an app with the express purpose, or at least the interest in purchasing a product or service. We've discussed how a combination of motivation and ability facilitate users taking the actions you want them to take, like signing up for your content or buying a product from you. Let's discuss the ability portion of the equation and how best to approach users who could have issues accessing your content in the way you might originally foresee. A few words on why it matters. So according to the WHO, over 1 billion people, which is around 15% of the world's population, live with some form of disability. Particularly pertinent to designers of digital products like ourselves is that 217 million people have a moderate to severe vision impairment. And what's more is that the number's expected to rise, potentially even to triple, because of an aging population and population growth. At its core, there are 4 groups of disabilities, which can be either temporary or permanent, consisting of physical, sensory, intellectual, and mental illness. Any one of these can inhibit a user's ability to use your digital product or to follow the carefully laid user journeys you've created. Over 70% of UK websites and apps are not compliant with current accessibility laws. And with nearly 12 million people in the United Kingdom with additional needs, this could add up to roughly 1/5 of your users who are unable to access the full potential of your product or even use it at all. Some of the things that you should be thinking about. So physical, things like paralysis, fine motor control issues or amputees, sensory, things like blindness, autism or deafness, intellectual, so developmental delays, Down syndrome, and finally mental illness, so things like schizophrenia and depression. All of these can have an effect on how people interact with your product or service. As well as the above, it's also important to think about age and experience-related ability issues. Older people might have age-related disabilities while also lacking the experience using digital products. So this includes indicators and triggers that younger people have learned over a lifetime of using digital products and mobile apps, and they now take for granted. As more of us are using the internet for more things, especially right now in lockdown, it becomes even less acceptable for content to be gated off by ability-based barriers. Not only this, but when your app isn't accessible, you're potentially missing out on valuable customers. As a business, can anyone really afford to allow their accessibility savvy competitors such an easy win? So what are the laws around mobile app accessibility? I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on this, and the slides are going to be shared at the end of the presentation. But the main part that's relevant is that in the UK and US, they're both covered by blanket equality and disability laws. And in the case of the UK, this is actually untested in the courts. So the best way to deal with this is to work within the WCAG guidelines, which we'll move on to now. And that will cover you internationally as well. The WCAG, or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, are recognized as the best indicator of how your digital product is faring in relation to best practice. And as noted here, will most likely cover you legally, given that the UK, the US, and the EU all use this as a baseline for their own public service guidelines. These are developed by the W3C, or the World Wide Web Consortium, as part of their Web Accessibility Initiative, and they're a wholly independent measure of how your digital product measures up. Though designed originally for websites, you can use these principles perfectly well within mobile applications or any other digital product. The best way to ensure that you match up to these principles is pretty simple as well. You can load up the handy quick reference guide. There's a URL on there, and these slides are going to be shared. Also, Dave, if you could pop this into that link into the chat, that'd be really useful as well. So you can load up that guide, and you can use this as the basis of your testing for your current app or your designs. It is pretty time consuming though, and often businesses outsource it to an agency partner like us, or to an accessibility specialist who's got more experience in the field. Some quick wins as well, things that you can do pretty quickly and pain-free, and it's not going to affect your able-bodied users, are things like adding alt text for your images, or allowing users to enlarge font sizes without breaking the layouts, using a high contrast foreground and background where possible. So think about your text color versus your page color. Avoiding thin fonts. Bear in mind color blindness when designing. There are some specialist tools online which can help you to view your app or your website as a colorblind user would see them. We use TopTal's colorblind web page filter. That's TOPTAL, and that's a really easy to use web version. And also things like allowing keyboard navigation, ensuring that all interactive elements are available. Frankly, it really isn't. Oh, I seem to have lost a page there. It really isn't difficult to follow the WCAG principles. However, for a long time, there's been a prevailing opinion in UX circles that making concessions to accessibility, can lead to a poorer overall user experience. And while it's true that you'll need to amend the way you work and keep accessibility in mind while designing, working within this space isn't so prescriptive that it's going to destroy the experience for users who don't have these issues. A number of changes that can be made operate entirely in the background, and they're almost imperceptible to able-bodied users. So as we start to come towards the end of this webinar, some conclusions and key takeaways. We've discussed a number of topics today, and it might feel a little daunting trying to get started on all of these things at once, but there are a few things that we'd recommend depending on if you're starting from scratch with a new idea for a digital product, or if you've got an existing digital product that you're looking to improve. If you are starting from scratch, the format of this webinar isn't far from the truth in the process of creating a great version 1 of your product. You should start by working on a Limbic Map to create your user motivation groups, and then think of other successful products that also use these motivators. Use brands that trade on those motivators to help guide design decisions. So, for example, use people who purchase Rolex watches will fit the dominance motivator, as they want to be perceived as the best, even when the function is the same as other watches. From here, look through your user journey, make sure you're considering the motivations of your personas and the principles of persuasions outlined by Cialdini. This will help you to make your content and user interactions compelling and allow you from the start to test how these motivators influence your users' decisions. You should also work through a set of usability guidelines. It's a job that's much easier to get right the first time than retroactively fix. So design your solutions with the web content accessibility guidelines in mind. Another bonus of these is they help with organic searches, and it'll save hours of development time in the future if you do this early on. And finally, working with your existing product. So if we work on an existing product, we have a 6-step framework to improve the app or product. First of all, we work on understanding. So you need to explore the objectives of the product, objectives that the product was designed to solve. These can change over time, and therefore the understanding of the product's purpose can also change. You need to make sure that the product is functional. Does the solution perform as expected technically? Over time, all digital products begin to break down and gather tech debt. So it's especially true in app development as well, with numerous OS releases each year. You need to make sure that the product is working as expected to moving on onto the things we've discussed today. So these provide the groundwork or the foundation for what we've talked about. Then we can move on to what we've been discussing today. And we'd start with accessibility. So can people use the products on all devices, all user skill levels? Is it inclusive? How does it work against the WCAG guidelines? Then we'd move on to usable. Is it user friendly? Can people use the product instinctively? Then intuitive. Does it match the user's thought sequences? And finally, persuasive. Are users convinced by your offering that you're going to fulfill their needs? So that brings us to the end of today's webinar. Thank you so much for attending. I'm going to have a couple of drinks of water and hand back to Dave so he can manage our Q&A session, but I'll undoubtedly be back in a moment to answer some questions.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Aaron. Wow, that's amazing how much you managed to cram into about 50 minutes there. And I know you talked a lot about it. If anybody does have any further questions, please feel free to get in contact at the attached email address, and we'd be happy to come back and answer them. We do have some questions in the chat, Aaron, that I'm going to ask you now that came out as we went through. So I had a question from Meg, who says, how do I get users to do things I want that they might deem undesirable without falling into dark patterns? So what do you think about that?
Cheers. Thanks for that, Meg. That's a really good question. So, I mean, I think the first place that I would start is thinking about why are you trying to convince your users to do something that they don't want to do, and making it more appealing to them so they do want to do it. So if we use our Windows 10 example before, Microsoft could have done things like shown features of Windows 10 that weren't available in Windows 8, which of course was the one before Windows 10 because Microsoft can't name their products in a reasonable way. So maybe show some new features so that people actually want to upgrade, or show that it's more secure, or that there's some reason for them to want to do this. But if you don't feel that that's possible, you can also go back to Cialdini's motivators and look at things like social proof. So add in some reviews. 97% 5-star reviews from those who've upgraded and followed this process. I think the key thing is to just avoid going down that dark patterns route. There's tons of ways that you can use to convince people without tricking them. Yeah, any thoughts on that, Dave?
No, yeah, I think you summed that up great, Aaron. I think that's exactly what to do, and just try and convince the users through another route. But you've talked about that with the motivations. I've got another question for you, Aaron, from Sarah, who says, if my product is only used occasionally, is it worth me using notifications to bring them back more often so they don't forget about us?
Thanks, Sarah. Another good question. So I've got an example with this one. I think it depends how you want to use your product. So we've actually got some experience of this in terms of a telematics app that we've developed with a partner of ours. Now, the telematics app requires background processes to be firing pretty frequently. And one thing that we did find was that if users were weren't accessing the app and were just leaving it to run in the background, those background processes would be shut down by either Android or iOS, because both operating systems assumed that you didn't want them to be running because you're not actively engaging with that app. So in that case, we did want people to actively engage with the app, despite the fact that they probably would rather it just ran in the background. And we started putting in place some things to bring users back into the app and to queue that and trigger it. However, if your application doesn't require these sorts of background services, then I think go with the sort of cadence that feels right to you for people to be using the app. You don't want to be annoying people. One way that you could try and get people into your app, if you do want to encourage them to be engaged with it, but your core offering isn't something that they need to engage with more than every week or every month, is to add something more tertiary in there. So maybe some blogs or some updates on things that are going to interest them, but aren't actually part of your core offering.
I think that's a great answer, Aaron. I'm conscious that we're coming up to 3 o'clock, so I'm probably not going to go through all of the questions. I will email the answers out to the questions asked to the individuals. And if we think it's a pertinent question for everybody, we'll probably add that to an email to everybody so everyone can see what was asked. But I'd just like you all to thank you all for attending. Aaron, thank you for giving up your time this afternoon for that presentation. That was wonderful. And we hope to see everybody that's made it this time on our next future webinar. Thank you very much.